My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye across the dinner table and sneered, "Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back." My son sat beside her, nodding as if her words were law. The house I had built brick by brick with my late husband was dismissed as if it never belonged to me. That night I didn't scream or beg. I moved out in silence, my dignity dragging behind me like a shadow. But what they didn't know was that my husband left me one final gift, a secret that would change everything. When I walked out of that house in silence, carrying only a suitcase and a heart that felt hollow, the cold air of Ohio bit through my coat. The night was sharp and unforgiving, but not nearly as cruel as the words that had been spoken at the dinner table. As I took each step away, my mind did what minds always do when something shatters. It reached backward, searching for the moments that made the breaking possible. I thought of 40 years before, when this story had begun. Back then, I was just Evelyn Harper, a girl of 22 standing beside Robert on a stretch of land that looked like nothing more than weeds and rocks. We didn't have money, but we had stubbornness, and we believed that if we worked hard enough, the earth itself would bend to our will. That patch of ground became our home. Robert hammered the first nails while I held the wood steady, laughing when the board slipped. We mixed concrete by hand, laid brick in the heat, painted walls under lamps because daylight was never enough. Every blister on my palms was a promise. One day, this house would shelter our children, our grandchildren, the life we built together. There were sacrifices, endless ones. When Jason, our only son, needed braces, we sold Robert's fishing boat. When the tuition bills came, I slipped off my wedding ring and pawned it without telling him, smiling as if I had simply misplaced it. I worked double shifts at the textile mill, hands raw from fabric dye, eyes burning from the dust. Robert picked up weekend jobs fixing fences, mowing fields, doing whatever the neighbors could pay for. We told ourselves it was temporary, that one day we would breathe easier. The house grew with us. The oak tree in the front yard, once a skinny sapling, stretched tall enough to shade the porch. The kitchen saw burns and repairs, and more than one midnight argument patched up with coffee instead of sleep. The hallway walls carried Jason's pencil marks charting his height each birthday. In the garden, I planted roses the year my mother died, and lilies when Robert's father passed, so the earth would bloom even when hearts broke. Every inch of that place was paid for with sweat, laughter, and loss. People said we were old-fashioned, that we tied ourselves too tightly to bricks and wood. But they never saw what I saw. Robert, standing in the doorway after a long shift, his face lit by the warm kitchen light, whispering, "We made this." They didn't hear Jason as a boy, clapping his hands when he found his new bedroom painted blue, shouting, "This is my castle!" They didn't feel what it meant to hold onto a mortgage statement stamped, "Paid in full," after decades of watching dollars vanish like smoke. There were lean years, too. When Robert's back gave out from lifting too much steel at the plant, it was me who worked nights to cover the bills. I remember walking home in the dark, boots crunching on gravel, body aching, whispering to myself that the pain was worth it. When Jason begged for a computer in high school, we ate beans and rice for weeks so he could join his classmates in the digital age. I wore the same coat for 12 winters, patching holes until it looked like a quilt. Still, I never resented it. My son would have more. That was the bargain of motherhood, or so I thought. Our house was not grand. The siding peeled some years. The roof leaked in storms. But it was ours. It was Robert's steady hands on the beams, my fingerprints on the walls, our laughter tangled in the curtains. Every sacrifice was woven into its foundation. I believed, no, I trusted, that Jason would feel it too, that he would understand what it meant to live inside a love that had cost everything. Even after Robert died, I walked the halls and felt him there. His hammer still hung in the garage, the handle worn smooth from his grip. His chair at the table stood empty, but I couldn't bring myself to move it. At night, I'd sit alone in the living room, listening to the wind in the oak branches, and tell myself that this home was still mine because it held the life we made. But I was wrong. I thought love guaranteed belonging. I thought decades of giving, of bending, of scraping by so others could rise would be remembered. I believed that sacrifice was a kind of inheritance, that gratitude would bloom naturally in the hearts of those who received it. I was naive. The truth is, sacrifice doesn't ensure loyalty. It doesn't buy you a permanent place in the hearts of those you love. Sometimes it only teaches them how much they can take before you have nothing left. As I stepped into the cold that night, my suitcase rattling against the pavement, I realized something I had refused to see for years. The very person I raised, the boy I once fed from my own plate, the man I thought would protect me, was the one who smiled as my daughter-in-law erased me from my own home. And yet, even with the sting of betrayal burning through me, I could not hate him. Not yet. My heart was too full of the past, of images that would not let go. Jason at 6 years old, cheeks red from running, arms reaching for me. Jason at 12, eyes bright with pride when he won his first spelling bee. Jason at 18, hugging me so tight before leaving for college that I thought he might break. How do you hate what you once loved more than yourself? I didn't know then. But I knew this. The story of what I had given was not finished, and the cost of it all, the weight of 40 years, was about to demand its reckoning. But I never expected the reckoning to come from silence, because the cruelest truth is this. Sometimes the hands you raise, the ones you feed, the ones you believe will carry you in your old age, are the very hands that push you out the door. And mine just had. But they didn't know me. Not really. They didn't know what I carried in my blood, in my memory, in the quiet depths of a woman who had built a home from dust. They didn't know what my husband left behind. They didn't know that grief can become fire. They didn't know that silence can be sharper than any scream. They didn't know me at all. But they would. The night of my undoing didn't start as a storm. It began with the clinking of silverware against china, the low hum of the overhead light, and the smell of roast chicken Sierra had prepared. I had dressed neatly for dinner, pressing my blouse until every wrinkle was gone, because I believed appearances still mattered. I sat at the end of the table, the place Robert used to take, as if by staying there I could keep a trace of him alive. Jason sat across from me, his phone face down by his plate, while Sierra carved meat with quick, decisive strokes that reminded me of a surgeon cutting flesh. We ate in silence at first, and I thought perhaps this would be one of those evenings where we all simply coexisted. I had grown used to their polite small talk, the kind that never included me. I poured gravy, offered bread, listened to the sound of my granddaughter's footsteps upstairs, the only sign of life that made me feel tethered to this house. I was almost grateful for the quiet. Almost. Then Sierra set down her fork with a click that felt louder than it should have. She looked at me as if she'd been rehearsing something, her lips pressed into a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Evelyn," she said, her voice smooth, deliberate, "now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags and never come back." The room went still. My fork hovered above my plate. My breath snagged in my throat like cloth on a nail. I thought I had misheard. My ears rang. Surely Jason would stop her. Surely my son, the boy who once begged me never to leave his bedside when nightmares came, would defend me. But Jason didn't protest. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, and said almost casually, "The house was never really yours anyway." I felt it then. A crack so deep it rattled my bones. A betrayal sharper than any knife Sierra could have held. My own child, the blood of my blood, had just agreed to erase me from the very place I bled to create. I tried to swallow, but the food turned to ash in my mouth. My hands trembled in my lap, hidden beneath the table. I wanted to ask him why, wanted to remind him of the nights I went without so he could have shoes, the years I aged twice as fast to keep this roof over his head. but my tongue felt heavy, paralyzed by the weight of disbelief. Have you ever been silenced by pain so profound that words dissolve before they can form? If you're listening, if you've ever been dismissed, erased, made to feel like a guest in your own life, then you know that silence. It is not peace. It is a wound that cannot close. I looked at Jason, really looked, and saw not the boy I had raised, but a man whose eyes mirrored Sierra's cold calculation. They were partners, not just in marriage, but in pushing me out, and I was the obstacle to their future. Sierra sipped her wine as if nothing had been said, as if she had merely commented on the weather. Jason picked up his fork again, cutting into the chicken like he hadn't just gutted me with his words. The casualness of it, this dismissal wrapped in domestic ritual, hurt worse than anger could have. I thought of Robert then, of how he used to grip my hand under this very table whenever life threatened to splinter us. His absence weighed on me, heavier than the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. If he were here, he would have roared in my defense. But he was gone, and I was alone with the children we had raised, who now treated me like an intruder. My chest tightened. I forced myself to breathe slowly, not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I cut a piece of bread, spread butter with steady hands, and placed it on my plate. They might have stripped me of dignity in words, but I would not let them take it in action. Not tonight. Dinner continued as if nothing had happened. They spoke of errands, of schedules, of Sierra's new promotion. I nodded where appropriate, my body present but my spirit retreating. Every sound felt muffled, like I was sinking underwater. I could hear their voices but not their meaning. All I could hear was Robert's voice in memory. Don't let anyone shrink you down, Evie. You are bigger than this house, bigger than any storm. When my plate was half empty, I set down my fork. I folded my napkin carefully, pressing the creases flat as if the act could steady my soul. Then I pushed back my chair. "Excuse me," I whispered. Neither of them looked up. I walked to my room. No, not my room, just the space in the basement they called temporary, and began to pack, not in a rush, not with tears, but with deliberate hands. Each item folded was a farewell. Each book tucked away was a memory I refused to let them touch. Upstairs, I heard their laughter drift down, light and careless, as if the woman who had given Jason life was nothing more than background noise fading into silence. If you've ever given everything only to be told you don't belong, you know this ache. Tell me, have you felt it? Have you carried the weight of being called unnecessary in a life you built? If so, you are not alone. By the time I zipped my suitcase, the house felt different, colder, smaller, no longer mine. Perhaps it never was. Perhaps I had only been holding on to an illusion stitched together by love and sweat. And illusions, once broken, can never be mended. I carried my suitcase up the narrow stairs, past the hum of their conversation, past the photographs still hanging on the wall, Jason at 10, Jason at his graduation, Jason holding his newborn daughter. Memories framed and frozen, even as the flesh and blood version of him erased me with a smile. At the door I paused. The air smelled of rosemary from the roast, of lemon from the polished wood. It smelled like home. And yet, it wasn't mine anymore. I stepped outside into the night, the cold biting sharper than before, but it was nothing compared to the chill left in my heart. I closed the door softly behind me. No one followed, no one noticed. And just like that, I was gone. The night air swallowed me as soon as the door shut behind me. The weight of my suitcase dragged against the pavement, its wheels catching on cracks in the sidewalk. Each clatter echoed louder than my footsteps, louder than my heartbeat, louder than the life I had just been erased from. Behind me, the house stood in silence, its windows dark. Not a curtain moved, not a shadow shifted. For 40 years, that house had been my sanctuary, my battlefield, my pride. Now it was nothing more than 4 walls holding strangers who once called me mother. I didn't cry, not then. My tears had dried long before, somewhere between Sierra's sneer and Jason's smirk. Instead, I kept walking down the empty street, the night stretching ahead like a tunnel with no end. Streetlights flickered, throwing long shadows across my path. I felt like one of them, half here, half gone, always at the mercy of someone else's switch. The suitcase grew heavier with every block, though it held little. A few blouses, Robert's old flannel shirt, the photo of Jason as a boy holding a toy truck, and a Bible with frayed edges. I hadn't packed much. Now, you don't pack much when you know you've been dismissed, when you understand your presence is no longer welcome. By the time I reached the bus station, my arms ached. The fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of plastic chairs. Families clustered together, mothers wiping crumbs from their children's mouths, fathers lifting toddlers onto their laps, teenagers scrolling on phones while leaning against grandparents who nodded off in peace. The sight hit me like a blow. I stood apart, clutching my suitcase handle, invisible in plain sight. I found a seat in the corner, far from the vending machines where laughter bubbled. My hands shook as I folded them in my lap. The hum of voices filled the room, yet none of them belonged to me. I was a ghost, sitting among the living. It's a strange thing, invisibility. You spend your life giving, offering, bending, and one day you vanish from the very picture you helped paint. People walk past you without noticing. You sit in a room and no one meets your eyes. Have you ever felt it? That hollowing when you realize you've become scenery in other people's stories? If you have, then you know the weight I carried that night. The clock above the ticket counter ticked with stubborn precision. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. I didn't buy a ticket. I didn't know where to go. All I knew was that I could not go back. I slipped my hand into the pocket of Robert's flannel, needing comfort. My fingers brushed against paper, folded small. Curious, I pulled it out. The edges were yellowed, the ink faint. My breath caught when I saw his handwriting, shaky but familiar. Evie, it began. My eyes blurred as I traced the letters. Don't let anyone take your dignity from you, not even those you love most. Remember, you built more than walls. You built a life, and that life cannot be stolen, not while you still breathe. I pressed the note to my chest, my heart hammering. Robert, always thinking ahead, always leaving me something to hold on to. He must have tucked it into his shirt pocket long ago, and somehow it had ended up here. A fragment of him had found me in the moment I needed him most. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Not loud sobs, just a steady stream sliding down my cheeks, falling onto the thin paper that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. For the first time since leaving the house, I allowed myself to grieve, not just for Robert, but for the son I had lost, even while he still lived. I sat hunched in that plastic chair, clutching the letter as if it were a lifeline. Around me, voices rose and fell. A child laughed. A baby cried. A man cursed under his breath when his soda got stuck in the vending machine. Life moved, pulsed, flowed, and I sat still, alone, but breathing. At some point, I closed my eyes. The station's hum faded into the background, replaced by memories. Robert lifting me over the threshold when the house was first complete. Jason, small and smiling, running barefoot through the yard. The smell of bread baking in the oven. The feel of my wedding ring before it left my hand for tuition money. They were mine still, those moments. No betrayal could take them. And perhaps that was what Robert had meant. Life was not walls or deeds or signatures. Life was memory, endurance, dignity. When I opened my eyes again, the letter still lay warm in my palm. My breathing had steadied. I was not strong, not yet, but I was not shattered either. There was a thin line between brokenness and rebirth, and I was balanced on it. The sky outside the station began to pale, streaks of gray brushing against the black. Dawn was coming. Another day, whether I wanted it or not. I smoothed the paper, folded it carefully, and tucked it back into the pocket of Robert's shirt. I didn't know where I would go. I didn't know what I would do, but I knew this. I would not let Sierra's words define me. I would not let Jason's silence bury me. I had been erased, yes, but erasure is not the same as ending. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle and stood. My legs were unsteady, but they carried me forward. One step, then another. Out into the morning air that smelled faintly of rain and possibility. Behind me, the bus station buzzed on. Ahead, the road stretched, uncertain but mine to walk. And somewhere in the folds of Robert's letter, dignity stirred, reminding me I was still here. The morning after I left the bus station, I found myself walking through the quiet streets of town, clutching my suitcase in one hand and Robert's flannel pulled tightly around me with the other. The letter he left in the pocket had burned in my chest all night, both a comfort and a command. I repeated his words like a prayer. Don't let anyone take your dignity from you. But dignity alone does not buy shelter. It does not pay for food. It does not keep the cold from crawling into your bones. I had nowhere else to turn but the bank. Robert and I had kept a joint account there for decades, though I believed most of it had been drained during his illness. I walked through the heavy glass doors, my steps hesitant, as if the floor itself might swallow me if I dared to ask for too much. The building smelled faintly of ink and old carpet, the kind of place where secrets always linger just beneath the surface. The teller recognized me. "Mrs. Harper," she said softly, her eyes flicking toward my worn clothes, the suitcase by my feet. "I'm sorry for your loss." I nodded, unable to form words. Loss had become my language. "I need to check the balance," I whispered. She tapped at her keyboard, her brows knitting. Then her eyes widened. "One moment, please." She disappeared into an office behind frosted glass. My stomach tightened. Had I overdrawn? Had Sierra already emptied what was left? I imagined myself leaving with nothing but humiliation. Minutes dragged. I watched the clock's hands crawl forward, each second louder than the last. Finally, a man in a suit stepped out, carrying a folder. He introduced himself as Mr. Langford, the branch manager, and invited me into his office. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Mrs. Harper," he began gently, "I think there's something you should see." He opened the folder, revealing documents with Robert's name, my name, and numbers that made my breath hitch. Not a few hundred, not a few thousand, a sum that could change everything. I blinked, convinced I was reading it wrong. That can't be right. We never had... My voice cracked. Mr. Langford nodded. "Your husband set up a private savings account years ago. It was designed so you wouldn't know until now. He also left a legal directive. This account is solely in your name, Mrs. Harper. You are the only beneficiary." I gripped the arms of the chair. The room tilted, my world spinning not from despair this time, but from shock. Robert, my Robert, always steady, always planning, had hidden this from me, not out of secrecy, but protection. He must have known. He must have feared what Jason and Sierra would do. Mr. Langford continued, "There is also a sealed letter from your husband. It's kept in our safe. Would you like to read it here?" My throat tightened. I nodded. He slid the envelope across the desk. My hands shook as I tore it open. Robert's handwriting sprawled across the page, shaky but still strong enough to carry his voice back from the grave. "Evie," it read, "if you are reading this, it means I couldn't shield you from the storm that came after me. I worried they would forget what you gave, what you built. So I made sure you would have enough to stand on your own. This account is yours alone. Don't let them convince you that you have nothing. You have everything you need to start again. You don't owe them a single thing. Live free, Evie. Live proud. You've earned it." I pressed the letter to my lips, tears blurring the ink. My heart ached with grief and gratitude all at once. He had prepared for this. He had seen what I refused to see, that love could be conditional, that loyalty could fail, that even family could betray. He had planned not just for survival, but for my independence. For the first time since I left that house, I felt a strange surge of power, not loud, not fiery, but quiet and steady, like a river carving stone. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my purse. Then I looked at Mr. Langford. "What do I need to sign?" He handed me a pen, the papers spread neatly before me. My hand hovered for a moment, trembling. I thought of Jason's smirk, Sierra's cold eyes, the silence of the house that had expelled me. Signing meant cutting the last thread, stepping into a life they would never control again. I pressed the pen to paper. My name looped across the lines, bold, unshaken. Evelyn Harper. As the ink dried, a thought crystallized inside me. Some battles don't require raised voices or slammed doors. Some battles are won in silence, with a signature, with a refusal to be erased. I slipped the documents back into the folder, my pulse steady for the first time in weeks. Walking out of the bank, the sun caught in the glass doors, dazzling my eyes. I squinted against the light, and for a moment it felt like Robert was there, standing just beyond the glare, smiling at me with that steady, reassuring grin. I tightened my grip on the purse holding his letter and whispered to the wind, "Thank you." Because in that instant, I understood. I wasn't cast out with nothing. I wasn't at the mercy of Sierra's disdain or Jason's betrayal. I wasn't empty-handed. I wasn't powerless. I choked back a laugh, bitter but laced with relief. "I thought they erased me," I murmured to myself. But Robert wrote me back into the story. And as I stepped onto the sidewalk, purse heavy with the weight of possibility, I realized something else. There are fights you don't win by shouting. You win them by waiting for the right moment to place your pen to the page. I had just found my moment. I just hadn't decided yet what I would write next. I didn't go back to the house. Not once. The thought of standing in that kitchen again, of hearing Sierra's voice cutting me down, of watching Jason's silence harden into betrayal, it was unbearable. But more than that, it was unnecessary. Robert had left me enough, and his letter had left me something greater than money, permission to walk forward without looking back. At first, I drifted. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment above a shuttered bookstore. The windows rattled when the wind blew, and the floor creaked under my steps. But it was mine. No one could sneer me out of it. Each night I sat by the window with tea, Robert's flannel draped over my shoulders, imagining what life could look like if I started again. It was during one of those evenings, watching the street below, that I noticed a vacant shop for rent on the corner. The sign was faded, the windows clouded with dust, but something about it tugged at me. The next morning I walked inside. The space was small, just a single room with cracked tile and a counter that leaned slightly to the left. But I saw it clearly, as if it were already alive. Tables with mismatched chairs, shelves of teapots, a kettle whistling in the background. I signed the lease within a week. I poured myself into that place the way Robert and I had once poured ourselves into our home. My hands scrubbed the tiles, sanded the counters, painted the walls in warm shades of cream and green. I filled jars with loose-leaf tea from a small supplier, bought secondhand teacups from thrift stores, and hung lace curtains that caught the afternoon light. It was humble, imperfect, but it breathed with my effort. When I unlocked the doors for the first time, I didn't know if anyone would come. But by evening, 2 women wandered in, drawn by the smell of chamomile drifting into the street. They sat hesitantly at a table until I offered them tea, steaming and fragrant. One of them, a widow like me, began to talk, at first about the weather, then about her husband, her loneliness, her children who rarely called. The other woman joined in, her story almost identical. I sat with them, listening, pouring more tea, realizing that what they needed was not just a drink, but a place where silence could be broken. Word spread quietly at first. A handful of women came, then a few more. By the second month, the tables filled each afternoon. They brought their knitting, their worn photo albums, their griefs and their laughter. They shared recipes, stories, secrets too heavy to keep alone. My little shop became a kind of refuge, a sanctuary for women who had given their lives to others and now found themselves invisible. I never advertised. I didn't need to. One woman would tell another, and soon a circle formed wider than I imagined. Some nights I stayed long after closing, washing cups while the voices of the day echoed in my memory. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded not by judgment, but by kinship. Then came the twist I never expected. A local journalist stopped by, curious about the crowd spilling out of a shop with no sign except one painted word above the door: Haven. She wrote an article titled "A Quiet Revolution Brews in a Teacup," describing my shop as a place where forgotten women found a voice again. The story spread. People I didn't know came by, not out of pity but out of admiration. A retired teacher offered to run poetry readings. A younger woman asked if she could host workshops on writing memoirs. Even a group of high school girls came, wanting to interview us about resilience for a school project. My small corner of survival had become a living, breathing community. There were evenings when I stood behind the counter, kettle steaming, and looked at the tables crowded with women, some laughing, some crying, all alive. And I thought, this is what rebirth looks like. Not loud, not grand, but steady and full of warmth. One night, I closed early and sat with a few of the women who lingered. We pushed the tables together, passing plates of cookies someone had brought. They told me stories of the men they had loved and lost, of children who moved away and forgot to call, of gardens they tended alone. The room glowed with lamplight, their voices weaving into a kind of music. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from release. For so long, silence had been my cage. Now it was laughter, soft and genuine, that filled the emptiness. If you've ever carried a wound you thought would never heal, you'll understand this moment. Healing doesn't always come from the ones who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from strangers who carry wounds of their own and choose to share the weight. I poured another round of tea, smiling as steam curled upward, and thought of Robert. He would have loved this place. He would have seen in it the same thing I did, proof that life can bloom even from the ashes of betrayal. As the women said their goodbyes and drifted into the night, I stood at the door, the sign above me glowing faintly in the streetlight, Haven, and I realized I had found mine. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need recognition from Jason or Sierra. I didn't need the house I once fought for. I had something better. I had rebuilt myself in silence, and that silence had turned into a chorus. And yet, even as I closed the door behind me, locking up for the night, I knew this story wasn't over. Because sometimes the world has a way of circling back, just when you least expect it. The article ran on a Sunday morning. I didn't even know it was coming until a woman in the shop handed me the folded paper, her hands trembling with excitement. "You're on the front page of the community section, Evelyn," she said. I laughed it off, embarrassed, but when I saw my own face smiling above a headline that read, "The Woman Who Disappeared and Built a Haven for the Forgotten," my heart skipped. The article told my story without naming Jason or Sierra. It spoke of the widow who left quietly one night and turned her grief into a place of belonging. It described Haven as a lifeline for women who thought they were invisible. It quoted me, words I had barely remembered saying. We may grow older, but that doesn't mean we grow smaller. We still carry worlds inside us. The shop was busier than ever that week. Strangers came in just to shake my hand, to sit for a cup of tea, to tell me how much the story moved them. Some stayed and joined the circle. Others left smiling with a bag of tea leaves. Each thank you I received felt like a brick placed firmly beneath my feet, lifting me higher than I had stood in years. I thought nothing of who else might be reading, but across town Jason was. I didn't see it, but I was told later. He had been at the grocery store glancing at the newspaper stand as he waited to pay. He reached for the paper absent-mindedly, scanning the headlines, and then he froze. My picture stared back at him, and for the first time in years, the smile on my face was not for him, not for his wife, not for the family I had poured myself into. It was for me, for what I had built without them. Neighbors saw him standing there, paper trembling in his hands, color draining from his face. They said he didn't move for nearly a minute, just staring, lips parted as if trying to swallow something jagged. Sierra tugged his arm, asking what was wrong, but he couldn't answer, because he knew he had let go of something that would never return. I didn't know any of this until later. That day, I was busy at the shop, pouring tea, listening to a woman recite poetry about her late husband. But fate has a cruel, quiet way of weaving circles. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I saw him again. I had just finished closing up, the last of the women leaving with a wave and promises to return tomorrow. The sun hung low, casting the street in golden light. I stepped outside with the broom, sweeping the leaves from the doorway, when I noticed a man across the street standing still, watching. Jason. He looked older than I remembered, lines etched deeper around his mouth, his shoulders heavy as if burdened by something he could never put down. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he crossed the street slowly, cautiously, like a child afraid of startling a bird. Mom. His voice cracked on the single word. I froze, the broom handle stiff in my hand. My heart clenched, not with longing, but with the echo of what once was. He stood there searching my face as if hoping for a door to open. But there was no door left. I smiled, soft and brief. The kind of smile you give a stranger when passing on the street. Then I turned, locked the door of Haven, and walked away. My steps were steady, my head high. Behind me, I heard his breath hitch, a half-formed plea that never became a sentence. If you're listening, if you've ever been betrayed by the ones you gave everything to, you know this choice. Tell me, if it were you, would you turn back? Would you open your arms to those who once erased you? Or would you do as I did, keep walking, carrying nothing but your dignity? The sun dipped lower as I walked, painting the pavement in long shadows. Each step felt lighter than the last. I had no need for apologies, no hunger for recognition. The world had already given me what I needed: a new home, a circle of women who saw me, a place where silence had been broken into laughter. I wasn't a warrior standing on the ruins of revenge. I was something quieter, gentler, but no less powerful. A woman who had been discarded and yet found a way to bloom again. As I turned the corner, leaving Jason behind, I whispered to myself the truth I had earned. Victory does not always roar. Sometimes it walks away in silence, head held high. And that silence was mine.